Hi, hello, welcome. Miss Toby. It's totally like me to forget to film an intro for my first YouTube video. So here we are doing it in the post. Today's video is all about Dune 2021 by Denis Villeneuve. I've seen it multiple times and I've always had so many different ruminations about it. I wanted to sit down, I wanted to talk about it, and if you guys want to listen, this is a video for you. Before we get into any kind of analysis or breakdown, we have to talk a little bit about the world of Dune. So Dune is set a couple thousand years into our future, and it follows the story of Paul Atreides, a young nobleman who has to reckon with the possibility that he might be some sort of messianic leader meant to bring paradise to this desert planet called Arrakis. Now, when Dune is beginning, Paul's father, the Duke Leto Atreides, has just been given stewardship of Arrakis. So they aren't there yet. They are still living on Caladan, their home planet. This time in the galaxy's history, the galaxy is divided into different aristocratic houses. So you have House Harkonnen, House Atreides, amongst others. These houses are led in the Landsraad, which is a council that governs the empire, by Emperor Corino. He has devised a plan to take down the Atreides because they have become more and more popular throughout the empire and are gaining more power, which he does not like. So what he does is he gives Arrakis, which has historically belonged to the Harkonnens, to the Atreides, and plans to kill off the Atreides once they're on Arrakis with the help of the Harkonnens. Let's talk about the House Atreides. So they come from the planet of Caladan. Caladan is very lush. So when Dune begins, the Duke Leto is running things. So they've been told that they're being sent to Arrakis. There's supposed to be a ceremony. As we see it unfold, we hear Leto say, "We are House Atreides. There is no fate. We do not betray. There's no call that we don't answer," something along those lines. And as much as you're meant to get the sense that they are a people of integrity or true to their word, there's also just an overall ominous vibe. Okay? You kind of know that some people aren't making out of this alive. West dubs the overall style of the film to be mod evil. She said to the Hollywood Reporter, quote, "I said to Denis, I think I have to look to the past, the distant, distant past, to find a style for this movie. I see it as mod evil, a modern take on medieval times." For Denis Villeneuve, it was really important that the costumes looked real and weren't too costumey or Halloween. Okay, that's not what we were trying to give. He didn't want anything that was too campy, anything that was too sci-fi. It's not trying to give alien, it's not trying to give spaceship. You're not supposed to even view these people as alien. The overall vibe for Dune Part 1 and 2 is not endeavoring to be a classic sci-fi film. Together, costume designers and beauty directors used real historical inspirations to construct the characters of Dune, creating a sci-fi world that feels a little bit more grounded in our reality. Dune is imagining a world being rebuilt after intergalactic warfare. In this world, there needs to be a combination of futuristic elements, but also needs to be remnants of things that are contemporary to us, things that we could recognize, whether they are aesthetic things like the clothing that they wear, or linguistically. Atreides family wardrobe was really inspired by the Romanov family pre-revolution. So elegant but doomed. In Dune, we see Duke Leto Atreides, played by Oscar Isaac, and Paul, played by Timothée Chalamet, wearing straight-back, high-collared blazers and their hair in full wavy effect. In contrast to the Romanovs, there's nothing too ostentatious or too baroque about their look, which again speaks to the world that Dune is set in. This is a world that is rebuilding. So the mindset of the people forging that path forward is more utilitarian. It's all about being efficient. It's not necessarily about glamour. So the Duke was supposed to be clean shaven, which is pretty much in line with the book. In the 1984 adaptation, the actor had a sparse beard, and in the 2000 version, Children of Dune, the man was blonde. Arnold Moet explained to GQ that Leto's mood board featured images of Roman statesmen, Prince Michael of Kent, and of course, the Tsar Nicholas II. I think it's really interesting that they model him after these political leaders, and I think it's a way of exploring Leto as a political leader, especially when you contrast the Duke Leto and the Baron Harkonnen. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Beards are traditionally associated with masculinity, and I feel leadership, strong leadership, seasoned leadership. So, throughout the first half of the film, we hear a sort of slogan from Leto. Air power, sea power, desert power. We first hear it when Leto is explaining to Paul their move to Arrakis and what they're going to have to focus on when they get there. He says that their ancestors harnessed air power and sea power when they got to Caladan, and now that they're going to the desert, they have to harness desert power. And the Atreides do have a plan to harness desert power. Duncan Idaho, one of their top soldiers, is supposed to go to Arrakis early with a team to scope the place out. Later, when the Atreides actually get to Arrakis, we learn, along with the Atreides, the Fremen are amazing fighters. And that's when Leto says that he's found desert power. I would qualify Leto to be a benevolent colonizer. Now, once Leto meets with one of the Fremen leaders, Stilgar, he is taken aback by Stilgar's gift of his moisture, which is spit, but he reciprocates. And I think that in that moment, we're supposed to see that Leto, the different leader than the Harkonnens were. He wants what he would describe as collaboration, and so he shows deference to the Fremen insofar as they are willing to let him exploit their land and their resources. And we see that because soon after, when Stilgar asks for autonomy and says, "Do not come looking for our sieges, leave us alone," Leto says no. And he actually says that he must be able to surveil his domain. And that's what's really funny to me. In this interaction, Leto is actively trying to build what he would describe to be a friendship with the Fremen, a collaborative dialogue. While doing that, he is appealing to imperial power to gain dominion over what is their land. Like their land, their home, their resources. That's laughable. I mean, what are you doing? He means well, but it definitely, to me, like, it's benevolent colonialism. To be fair, why would Leto change? He's not doing anything that his ancestors didn't do. Like we learned, his ancestors got to Caladan and they harnessed air power and sea power. He's doing what he's always been bred to do. He still wants Arrakis to serve its purpose to the Imperium. He has no interest in undermining that effort. As if he doesn't, like, it does mean political disaster for his family. It's not like all he cares about is spice production. The novel does describe him, again, as being ruthless with his enemies, but compassionate and wise. And we do see that in action when he does meet the Herald of the Change, Dr. Liet Kynes, and insists on joining the team on this expedition in the desert. The imagery that we are supposed to get from looking at Leto make this choice is that of like a king who rides out in battle with his soldiers. That's the kind of leader that Leto is. He's still riding out to colonize. I would say that Leto Atreides is very Ned Stark coded, or rather Ned Stark is very Leto Atreides coded. Dune is sort of like the sci-fi fantasy Bible in a lot of ways. A lot of the like characters here are sort of archetypal for characters that you see in later sci-fi and like fantasy literature. So yeah, he is like Ned Stark. He's just not as stupid. He follows an honor code like Ned, but he's far more politically astute. And from the beginning of the film, you can tell that this man can clock what's going on because he knows that he's walking into a trap. He knows that, you know, shit might get a little bit dicey. And I also do think that the Atreides, kind of like the Starks, have similar house codes of like honor, integrity, bravery. And, you know, he's real about it to the end. All right, Lady Jessica is Leto Atreides' concubine. So Lady Jessica is a politically astute person who uses clothing to craft and communicate narratives. And in Dune Part 1, especially in Dune Part 2, that narrative is that her son is the Lisan al-Gaib. Jessica is one of the most important people in the Dune world because without her, there would not be a story. And that's because she is a Bene Gesserit. So the Bene Gesserit order is an elusive religious order that is running a eugenics program. That program is meant to engineer the Kwisatz Haderach, a male Bene Gesserit heir with ties to both maternal and paternal ancestry who could bridge a gap between space and time with his mind. Basically, that means that he could do magical shit with his mind, okay? They are trying to essentially bioengineer better leaders, okay? And they think that the quiz will be that leader. Now, Arrakis is central to the story because of spice. Spice is a psychoactive molecule that makes space travel possible. It is only available on Arrakis. Whoever controls spice controls the Imperium because they control interstellar travel. Arrakis is, however, a very volatile planet, both in climate and the people, because the people are not quick to submit to outside rulers. Unlike the great houses of the Imperium, the Fremen actually follow Zen Sunni, which is a blend of Zen Buddhism and Sunni Muslim beliefs. They don't follow the Orange Catholic Bible, which is what Paul Atreides, the Harkonnens, that's what they follow. Rather, they believe in Shai Hulud and believe that the sandworm is a manifestation of that god. Knowing this, the Bene Gesserit sent missionaries to Arrakis to spread a new fable, that a voice from the outer world would come and bring paradise, that is water, to Arrakis. Who is this voice from the outer world? The Kwisatz Haderach. The Lisan al-Gaib and the Kwisatz Haderach are the same. The Lisan al-Gaib is not the only solution for Arrakis and for its lack of water, but it is the solution that delivers to the Bene Gesserit and the Imperium the thing they need the most: the Fremen's submission. So what the Bene Gesserit hope is that the Kwisatz Haderach will take control of Arrakis and use that control to then launch a revolution that would lead him to controlling the known universe. As a part of their eugenic program, for generations, the Bene Gesserit have been basically matchmaking, orchestrating marriages between great houses, between Bene Gesserit ladies and men of the great houses, to eventually bring forward the quiz. Now, Lady Jessica was supposed to play a role. She wasn't supposed to give birth to the quiz, but she was supposed to give birth to a daughter who was going to give birth to the quiz. Get what I mean? The Bene Gesserit have this way of controlling their own conception. So like whether or not an egg is fertilized, whether or not that egg is implanted, like they control all of that via their magical mind thing, right? So she was supposed to use her magical mind thing to have a girl. She, however, fell in love with the Duke and he fell in love with her. And he was like, I really want a son. My man. I'm about to have a boy. That's what Lady Jessica was on. In doing so, she gave birth to a boy that inherited Bene Gesserit traits, bringing forth the quiz a generation early. She kind of fucked up the plan. It is the beginning of her role in the Messiah narrative as a virgin mother of sorts. She's not literally a virgin mother. What I'm saying is that it parallels the Immaculate Conception in that it doesn't require the participation of both parties. I feel like I need to elaborate a little bit more. Mary and Lady Jess are both taking part in this asexualized reproductive process to bring to the world a Messiah figure. Like that's the similarity there. Don't really know why it took me so much to say it. So I find it additionally interesting that Jacqueline West had Francisco Goya, Giotto, Caravaggio on the mood board for Lady Jess. I was looking up some of their paintings to see like what might have been inspiration for some of Lady Jessica's looks and just how she's presented in the movie. And I think Giotto's Ognissanti Madonna from 1306 was perhaps a source of inspiration. So Giotto is one of many other artists with an affinity for the Virgin Mary as a subject. I could see this painting inspiring some of her earlier looks on Caladan because of like the way the clothing is draped on her. She's wearing black, which is what they were wearing a lot of on Caladan. The way Caravaggio plays with light, I could see really inspiring some of the scenes between Mother Moyam and Lady Jessica, where they are shrouded in darkness. The cinematographer really plays with light like very interestingly in that scene. As a whole, like I just want to talk a little bit more about the Bene. Bene Gesserit is a deeply political organization. They are supposed to be a religious organization, and if you watch Dune Prophecy, you kind of get the earlier years of the Bene Gesserit, and you get a remnants of that like more religious, pious aspect is now long gone by the time you get to Dune. When you evaluate their beliefs, you can see that they're more of a philosophical organization with like political ambition masquerading as a religious one. We see it at many points, but when we go back to Paul being tested, Jessica's on the other side of the door, repeating to herself, fear is the mind killer. I remember seeing that in theaters the first time. I was like, oh, that's stoicism. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like Star Wars and like fear is a path to the dark side, which is what Yoda said. I think the Jedi Order has what's it called? Has a more dogmatic worldview, a much more rigid view of good and evil. I would say that they are atheistic. Lady Jessica is a faithful observer of these values insofar as she is a skilled Bene Gesserit, but she's also a reverend, right? She defied the Reverend Mother by having a son out of love. Like, I don't think that's very much in line with Bene Gesserit beliefs. And I don't think she knew what she was signing herself up for. And I think we see that in the first half of the film when Mother Moyam Gaius sees Paul for the first time and Paul overhears a conversation that Mother Gaius and Lady Jess have. It's very clear that Mother Gaius is like furious that she didn't stick to the plan. She tells Jessica that, like, listen, we've done everything we can for you on Arrakis, referring to spreading that fable of the Lisan al-Gaib for the last thousands of years. She tells Jessica that Paul could be the one, but that the Bene Gesserit have done everything they possibly can for them on Arrakis. Like, you're on your own, boo. Essentially tells Jessica, or hints at Jessica, that capitalizing on that fable is up to them. And should Paul fail to capitalize on that fable, there are other possible messiahs. With that, Lady Jessica knows that being inextricably tied to that prophecy, having her son be associated with the title of being Lisan al-Gaib, is going to be imperative to their survival on Arrakis. And upon arrival to Arrakis, we see her adorned in this like beautiful yellow gown, and she has this jeweled head piece. So her introduction to Arrakis is marked by wearing this gold dress. It is starkly different to anything else that she is wearing on Caladan. So we can get the sense that this is a different wardrobe for a new environment, for a new land, for a new people that she is going to be having like dominion over. And I think that this outfit is supposed to mark that. She arrives with her family to a crowd crying out to a messiah. And they're told that it is remnants of the Harkonnens' dominance on Arrakis. This is the first time that she actually gets to see the effects of the Lisan al-Gaib fable. It's fitting that she's wearing this look. She is a Bene Gesserit woman, and she does have a young son. Like, she is identifying herself with all the important pieces of this prophecy, if that makes sense. Her style also adapts to the climate. She's wearing lighter colors than she wore on Caladan. A lot of the rest of her journey really unfolds in Dune Part 2. We do see an early glimpse of that in Paul's visions. She has a completely new look. She has tattoos across her face. She's wearing new fabrics, new garments. They're draped on her in ways that we haven't seen before. Those visions show Jessica after she's drunk the elixir and become the new Reverend Mother for the Fremen. That outfit, that look, is supposed to mark a transition for Lady Jessica. And I think you see a lot more of it happen in Dune Part 2, so go watch it. Next up we have Paul. Now Paul is a lot like his dad. He is observant, he is strong, quick, intelligent, brave, but in many more ways he is his mother's son. There is something odd about Paul, and he knows that. From the very beginning of the film, he's kind of wondering to himself, what the fuck is up with me? Because I have these crazy ass dreams, and sometimes they come true and sometimes they do not come true, and I don't know, it's fucking weird. So something Paul doesn't know yet about himself at the start of the film is that he might be a quiz, or what else is he called? Muad'Dib. So throughout the film, we see him reckon with the possibility that he might be this messiah figure who is supposed to bring water to the desert planet of Arrakis. He gets early insight into what this path forward might mean for him when he meets Mother Gaius. He has to face a test called the Gongjaba. Basically, there's pain in a box, and he has to put his hand in the box, and Mother Gaius holds a needle to his head, and if he removes his hand from the box, she would have to kill him immediately. The test is meant to see whether or not he has the self-control to live with the Bene Gesserit powers that he's inherited from his mother. I also think that this test gives us inkling into what the path ahead requires of Paul, and that path will require self-alienation, a complete detachment from his sense of self and also from his sense of morality, his sense of truth, his sense of falsehood, his sense of left and right. I don't think that Paul really understands this until the end of the movie, when he hears a voice that's telling him, Paul Atreides must die for the quiz to rise. His time in the desert after the Harkonnens wipe out his family was really pivotal into making that happen. It is so interesting because I feel like it mirrors like Jesus in the desert for those 40 days where he's being tested. Paul is being tested. I mean, for one, we see the literal death of his family. There is a scene where he's looking back at everything being blown up, which is kind of the physical manifestation of the legacy of the Atreides being killed off. But in the scenes and the moments that follow, Paul investigates who Paul is in the desert when he's not the son of a duke, when he cannot command the authority that comes with being the son of the duke. Who is Paul and where does he find his power? I think a really good scene that shows that Paul no longer has the leverage of like the dukedom is when Paul is with Liet Kynes, Duncan, and Jessica in the ecological testing centers and learns about the Emperor's sabotage, the whole plan to take out his family with the Harkonnens, and he tries to get Liet Kynes to be his witness against the Emperor. And Paul he's making traditional appeals to power by saying, you know, I'm the son of a duke, I am the duke, making appeals to his title. The thing is, the Atreides have no power. You have nothing. There is no title. Y'all don't exist. They just wiped you all out. And that's essentially what Liet tells him. He takes it a little bit further. He stops appealing to his power as a duke and starts appealing to his power as a possible messiah. Interesting, because in previous scenes in this movie, Paul calls the whole story of Lisan al-Gaib Bene Gesserit machinations. Like, he's not down with the idea of being a messiah. He's kind of against it. Interesting that at this point, he now says, forget all that. What if I'm the voice from the outer world? What if I'm the Messiah your people have been waiting for? What if, you know what I'm saying? Tie yourself to me, be my witness, and I can make shit happen. Which says a lot about Paul. He wasn't down with the idea of using messianism to control the Fremen until it benefited him. Prior to this moment, Paul shows himself to be a little bit more of a skeptic, even resentful towards the whole prospect of being Lisan al-Gaib. He makes comments on arrival to Arrakis about the Lisan al-Gaib being Bene Gesserit machinations. But at this point in time, circumstances have changed. Being Lisan means having the loyalty of the Fremen, and he's learned that the Fremen are great fighters. In this way, again, he is his father's son. He is trying to harness that desert power. If he's going to take on an empire, he's going to need amazing fighters by his side. So although we previously see a Paul who shows like a dislike for prophecy and its weight, he's now willing to embrace it because it will be his way to power, it will be his way to revenge, and it probably makes the rest of what unfolds in Paul's story, him becoming Muad'Dib, him starting a war, a lot more sinister, because he is someone who is capable of recognizing religious propaganda and recognizing that it could be harmful, but he's willing to play into it if it benefits him politically. So yeah, he's not even benevolent colonized like his daddy. He ain't shit. Move on to House Harkonnen. Now, the main character of House Harkonnen that I'm going to be talking about is Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. He does have a nephew, Glossu Rabban, who is very much a part of the film. Honestly, all I have to say about him is that he's bald and angry. House Harkonnen is the other major house and the main antagonist at the start of Dune. When speaking to the Hollywood Reporter, costume designer Jacqueline West explained that the Harkonnens' characterization was largely inspired by insects. They drew inspiration from medieval insect drawings that were done by monks. West explains that Baron Harkonnen's mother was called the Black Widow. She was very spider-like, so that gave her a hint on where to start with the Baron's look and the Harkonnens' overall vibe. The insect theme is really present when you look at the Harkonnens in the movie. They have a giant pet spider. The helmet for their soldiers is modeled after a giant ant head. The textured black leather in some of the Harkonnen costumes, all of that came from looking at insects and lizards and spiders. It's so fitting because one of the first things we learn about the Harkonnens before we ever see them is from Gurney Halleck, and he says that the Harkonnens are not human. He tells Paul this while they're training before they go to Arrakis, and so I think the Swordmaster is trying to impress on Paul that like their adversary does not fight humanely. they're not governed by that kind of decorum. They are venomous. A little Harkonnen family lore for you. Vladimir Harkonnen is a direct descendant of Bashar Harkonnen, who was banished for cowardice after the Battle of Corin. The return of House Harkonnen to power is generally attributed to manipulation, very Littlefinger. They regained power and wealth in the Landsraad through the whale fur market and later owning the production of spice. Their home planet is Gedi Prime, and it is really a stark contrast to Caladan. Caladan is lush, it's very green, very rainforest, very fauna and flora. Gedi Prime is much more harsh. It is an industrial, volcanic wasteland, and it is mostly due to the Harkonnens' industrialism. So it tells you a lot about what happens when the Harkonnens show up to places. They are destructive. Dune Part 2 features Gedi Prime more heavily. It's also shot in black and white film. The black and white film, the grain of it gives a sense that like the air is claustrophobic, and you get the sense that it's hard to breathe. So the Baron himself is described as a decadent, monstrous gas bag of depravity and evil, and that's within quotes. He is described as ruthless and cruel, cunning and intelligent. The Baron is, quote, crafty and power hungry. He has a talent for manipulating others and exploiting their weaknesses, as well as a propensity for torture and blackmail. In Children of Dune, it is heavily implied that he harms children. He's really the worst of the worst, and he's supposed to be. Frank Herbert's depiction of the character is fat-phobic. Like I said, Dune is the sci-fi Bible. So the Baron in a lot of ways is archetypal for a lot of the other fat villainous characters that we see in later sci-fi and fantasy. The Baron is 400 pounds and cannot move around using his feet, so he is carried using suspenders. Frank Herbert really does engage in this like classically fat-phobic use of fatness to communicate greed, excess, and overall moral depravity in his characters. Morven McKay writes for the Brig newspaper, quote, "When we first meet Baron Harkonnen in Denis Villeneuve's Dune, the weight of his presence is felt instantly. He sits alone in the vast room, his naked figure peeking out from behind a wall of mist. As the camera slowly approaches him, it's not his power we are encouraged to look at, it's his body." I actually kind of disagree with this. I would venture to say that his body is his power. You see that in scenes where he's interacting with Dr. Yue and with Leto at the end, where he's naked and incapacitated. What I was trying to get at here is that in this particular scene where he's talking first to Dr. Yue and then addresses Leto, the camera is angled such that it captures the size differential between the Baron and whoever he's speaking to. And that size differential, I think, is supposed to show like he really is the top dog. He is in charge. He's the one in power. Like, I think his size is meant to convey power. By lingering on his body in that introductory shot, we are engaging with his power. Costume designer Jacqueline West explains that director Denis Villeneuve wanted the Baron to look strong and menacing. Because of his size, the Baron, again, can't move around. He needs assistance. And so Denis feared that because of his disability, essentially, Denis was afraid that some of the audience might not take him seriously as a result. And so he wouldn't be considered intimidating. His size is not meant to be ridiculed. It's something that's meant to intimidate as well as communicating depravity. So when it came to dressing the Baron, what they put on him was really important. Jacqueline West suggested that they use Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now as inspiration. Actor Stellan Skarsgård wore a long black silk diaphanous muumuu and a fat suit. Ciao. Okay. It's really interesting to look at the Baron as a character that chooses to be fat. He's not fat because of a sob story. I think he's fat by choice. He gives me Ursula. Ursula is literally a witch, okay? If she wanted to be skinny, she could. She likes her body. And I think it's the same thing a little bit with Baron Harkonnen. Like, I think it's fair to say that body modification exists in the Dune world and exists on Gedi Prime. I mean, this is a society that has achieved interstellar travel. I would Like, I think that body modifications are probably a thing. He's also the only fat character on screen. I haven't read the books, but I feel like he's the only fat character in the books too. In this world, people do have the means to be skinny, whether naturally or via technology. And either way, the Baron is not interested. As a whole, the Harkonnens symbolize how greed corrupts, right? Hence their very distinctive looks. They're all bald, incredibly pale, because, you know, their home planet, Getty Prime, has so much pollution that the sunlight has been blocked. But I think we have to think about what the ramifications are of associating fatness with depravity, with the inhumane, with this fat villain trope. And I think it's like obvious. It can contribute to the dehumanization of fat people in real life. Considering that Dune is a canon of sorts for sci-fi and fantasy, I think it's safe to say that it has. Let's talk about the Fremen. So the Fremen are a fierce, loyal, warrior-based culture and people. Jacqueline West explained to The Hollywood Reporter that the costuming here was inspired by Islamic art and paintings. She didn't specify which Islamic culture, which, like, where, because that could be like Albania, but that could also be like Pakistan. The religion of the Fremen is also inspired by Sufism. And like I said, the religion Zen Sunni is a blend of Zen Buddhism and Sunni Islam beliefs. Fremen religion centers on desert worms, which they believe to be a manifestation of Shai Hulud. So naturally, the sandworm is sacred to the Fremen. Fremen people are people with lots and lots of pride, and they are not easily conquered or subdued. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they come from such a hostile environment, and so in order to survive, you cannot be easily broken down. Arrakis is a desert planet, and though spice is the most important resource to the outer world, in the desert, it's water. When Paul and Lady Jessica find the Fremen and they're told, what wealth can you offer beyond the water in your flesh? In this culture, water is the most valuable and guarded resource. Water is inherently consecrated because of its scarcity, and it's the holiness of water that shapes their way of life. Exhibit A, Leto meeting Stilgar. To show respect, he spits, giving a gift of your moisture. The fact that spit is considered a gift. The scarcity of water also shapes the way of life for transplants on Arrakis. So when the Atreides arrive, they learn that the way they live has to change a little bit. They have to take cover during certain hours of the day because it's just too hot to be outside. If they're in the open desert, they have to wear a still suit. The still suits are described in immense detail in the books, so I'm not going to get super into it, but they are essentially a distillery that recycles water. So it will recycle your sweat, your urine, your saliva, so that you have water to drink in the desert. Some of our main Fremen characters, now we don't get to see too much of the Fremen in the first movie. We more so learn about them through Paul's watching of documentaries, just the little moments that we have of Chani in his visions, or the small moments of interaction that we have between Stilgar and Leto and at the end of the film. Now, our main Fremen characters, we have Chani Kynes, who is the daughter of Liet Kynes. She exists primarily in Paul's dreams until they meet in real life at the end. She represents Paul's calling into the desert, but when we meet her at the end, we see that she is a skeptic, sort of a freedom fighter we see in Dune Part 2. And she tells Paul pretty explicitly that she does not believe that he is a messiah. And in Dune Part 2, you see that Chani is the girl consistently calling the bullshit. I think the biggest thing with Chani is that she falls into the trap of being a man's dream girl and he ruins her life. The way my girl Chani suffered, I don't like it. I also don't particularly like the way that Paul spoke to Liet Kynes in that ecological testing center. The way that he bucked up to that lady, I was like, you need to calm down. 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 Who are you talking to? Why are you talking to this black lady like that? Shut up. Be quiet. Who are you talking to? That shit actually had me tight. That had me mad. That had me slightly upset because she don't even work for you. How dare you? We meet Liet Kynes while she's working for the Emperor. She is a scientist and she's also Chani's mother. She is fully aware of the Harkonnens' sabotage and the plan with the Carino Empire to kill off the Atreides in the dead of night, but she is instructed not to say anything, not to out the sabotage. And she doesn't really. She does warn Leto, to watch out for his family. At the end of the day, her loyalty is to the Fremen people, and we see that. It's really hard to watch Dune and immerse yourself in that kind of cinematic world, in this sci-fi universe, and not see the obvious themes: environmentalism, messianism, fate, destiny, religion. Okay, so when it comes to environmentalism and Dune, I think it's pretty clear that spice is an allegory for oil. But Dune is also a novel that is pretty clearly about water. I mean, the main ecological dilemma of Dune is the lack of water, and it's manufactured. There's a solution, but that solution is not conducive to the goals of the colonists. So instead of running the ecological testing centers, they're running with a prophecy. So much of Dune is commentary on the consequences of colonialism. And to me, it makes me think about some of our current environmental issues, especially those that relate to water and access to water. And it makes you wonder, like, just how many of those issues are a byproduct of colonial era policy. How much of these are manufactured problems? The world of Dune is one in which Paul is one of many possible messiahs, and we see the other possibility in Dune Part 2 when you meet Frade Rofa, who is or Rofa, am I saying that man's name right? Whatever, Frade. When we meet Frade, he's one of the other possible male Bene Gesserit heirs who could be the Lisan al-Gaib. That's one of the things Dune got right as it relates to the real world. In our real world, messiah figures have always been one of many. I feel that Frank Herbert's idea of a messiah is more so based on this, based on a messiah that's not divine, but has a message of utmost importance to spread. If anything, the title of Messiah here describes Paul's role vis-a-vis the Fremen. It's a descriptor of his position vis-a-vis them, not necessarily a descriptor of his identity as like a divine being. He does become elevated to the status of a divine being after his death. I also think that the interchangeability of the Messiah figures in the Dune world, the fact that Paul is one of many, shows that what seems to matter more to Frank Herbert is not the Messiah figure himself, but rather the construct of a Messiah and its utility. Okay, so with this, I think Frank Herbert is saying that a messiah is a social construct, and we're meant to evaluate the ramifications of what that means. The messiah construct here functions in a few ways. So like I've already said, it functions to appease the Fremen by way of religious colonialism. If we recap, we know before the beginning of Dune, Bene Gesserit had sent missionaries to Arrakis to spread the fable of the voice from the outer world, the Lisan al-Gaib that would come to save them. We have no frame of reference for what Fremen religion was like before Bene Gesserit interference, which again, like, echoes the real life tragedies of colonialism. There are so many religions where it's like, what was that like before they colonized? You know, what was it like before interference? Despite the external interference in their religious practice, I think that you can still argue that there is a Fremen focus to their faith. I mean, you see Liet Kynes say to imperial forces who say you've betrayed the emperor, she responds with, I serve one god, Shai Hulud, before summoning the sandworm. We see their faith be used as a form of resistance. And it's just really interesting. And I think it reflects the paradox that we see indigenous people actively have to face in real life when it comes to faith, especially if they have faiths that were brought to them by their oppressors or faiths that experienced sort of interference from oppressors. As a whole, Frank Herbert explores religion as a tool for structuring society and its laws. And I mean, it fits more broadly into this idea that religion is a social construct, and it is pretty explicitly so in the Dune universe. Another big topic of conversation when it comes to Dune has been Orientalism. Now, if you're not familiar with the term Orientalism, let's talk about it for a second. According to the Stanford Philosophy website, the term Orientalism describes a structured set of concepts, assumptions, and discursive practices that were used to produce, interpret, and evaluate knowledge about non-European peoples. That's all in quotes. Said was basically writing a theory about knowledge and power and the relationship between the two. And basically what he said was endeavoring to know the East was ultimately a part of dominating it. So he uses the term Orientalism in many different ways. First, he describes it as a field of academic study that is focused on the Middle East and Asia. But he also identifies it as a practice that helps to define Europe by identifying its other. That's done by drawing these contrasting images and ideas based on binary oppositions, right? So like rational and irrational, mind and body, order and chaos, that help to manage and kind of place European anxieties about other people's. Like I said, Dune in many ways is a story about colonialism in the sci-fi context. I do think that in some ways it subverts a traditional Orientalist point of view. I think typically in an Orientalist text or movie, you would see a pattern of characters being passed off as irrational in comparison to their European counterparts. Like you would see these binaries that pass off characters that are supposed to represent the Middle East as being lesser than their European counterparts. But we don't really see that in Dune, especially when it comes to irrationality. The height of irrationality in Dune, in my opinion, is exemplified by a sincere and like undying belief in the Lisan Argaï. I think in Dune Part 2 we see it more with Stilgar, but we have to remember that in Dune, the only reason they even believe in the Lisan is colonialism, and that is like out in the open. The reader knows it, the people watching the movie knows it. That irrationality is a byproduct of outsider interference. It's not because it exists inherently in their culture. The Fremen are not represented in a monolithic way. They're not monolithic in their view of the Lisan al-Gaib. Chani Kynes is a perfect example. She is not really a believer, and she's not willing to abandon her rationality or her good sense. And so even that like diversity of thought existing amongst the Fremen, thought being something that exists independently amongst them, I don't know that an Orientalist like view is giving that. I think that Dune is critical of the colonial project in that it is critical of its intentions, talked about the benevolent colonizer and Leto and the way that he behaves towards the Fremen. I think you could consider that Orientalist because he seeks knowledge of the Fremen, but that is meant to dominate the Fremen. It is meant to facilitate his organizing of their resources and of their land. I think it's pretty clear that Herbert did not want us to see Paul or his mother as hero. This is a story where the protagonist turns into a villain thinking he's being a hero. We're following the adventures of a delusional person, right? Like he's the villain. And that's why I say that Dune is representing colonialism in a sci-fi context. So we see characters practice Orientalism. Okay, let me know what you think about my thought. Subscribe. Let me know if you agree, disagree, and why. And don't forget to share. Bye.